Welcome to The Girlfriend God, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience. Please rate and review on your podcast streaming platform. Leave a comment on YouTube. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. Let's get in the flow. Welcome to the Girlfriend God. Today, I'm really happy to welcome Liz Childs Kelly. Liz Childs Kelly with my last name, my first name as your last name. Also very fitting since you are my season finale for season 2. And so Liz Childs Kelly is a writer. She's an award-winning researcher, educator, a community builder, and host of the popular Home to Her podcast, which is dedicated to amplifying the voices of the sacred feminine. She's also the author of the new book, Home to Her, Walking the Transformation Path of the Sacred Feminine. Her writing has been featured in a variety of online publications, including Forbes, Mashable, Rebelle Society, Human Parts, a Medium publication, and Braided Way, as well as the Girl God Books anthology, Just As I Am, Hymns Affirming the Divine Female. An initiated priestess in the 13 Moons lineage. I may ask you about that. And she holds a certifications in Reiki as well as Vinyasa and Yin Yoga. And Liz lives in rural Virginia with her family and can often be found exploring the nearby Blue Ridge Mountains or wandering in the woods behind her home. And Liz, all of your social media links and where to find you online and where to purchase your book are all in the show notes on YouTube and wherever the podcast is available. So welcome.
Awesome.
Welcome to the show. Sorry for my stuttering through your little introduction there, but as you know, because we were talking before I hit record, I'm a little frazzled and disorganized this morning, but if you listen to my show, you should be fairly used to that.
It's all good.
By now. So, but welcome. And so before the show, we were talking about what we were going to talk about today, which was, and I'm just going to let you read that again for the listeners, which are our first topic, and then we'll see how much we get through. But actually, before you read that, so you're initiated in the 13 Moons lineage. Tell me and the listeners about that. Who, because that sounds familiar to me. So I want to know, like, whose priestess training that is and what you had to do. And
yeah, well, it's called the 13 Moon Mystery School, and it was founded by a woman named Arielle Spilsbury. She's based in California, in the Bay Area of California, and it operates under the nonprofit organization called Sanctuary of the Open Heart. And so it's a training in the 13 different divine feminine archetypes. And so that priestess initiation program is a year-long program that involves really going deeply into each of those archetypes for 1 moon a piece. And it's sometimes hard to put into words because it's so wildly experiential.
right.
It involves a lot of time in temple and ceremony. There is a tremendous amount of written material that Arielle has put out in the world that's really powerful. But above all, it's a very ceremonial and experiential program where you are really feeling deeply into those archetypes. And, you know, archetypes are like they're conduits of divine energy, right? And different people approach different divine feminine archetypes in different ways, but there's similarities and flavors through all of them. So I can give you some examples of some of the archetypal energy that you work with, but one is the Great Mother, for example. There's the creator, destroyer, sustainer.
Mhm.
There's goddess of love. There's the muse. There's the initiator, whose energy is really here to boom, catalyze you and shake you awake.
Right.
There's the queen of death. So each moon, you're really digging deep into those.
Right.
At times it was ecstatic. At times it was deeply uncomfortable. And I would say more so than any other work I've done, it probably catalyzed change for me the fastest.
Okay. So it sounds very familiar to me because Flora Ware, who's been on the show, I haven't released that episode yet, but Flora Ware runs a very similar training. And Flora Ware's website has a really interesting archetypal quiz. And I went to this 4-day intensive workshop that she did, where she had these kind of women from all different traditions from all over the world. And as part of that workshop, she sent everybody a link to this quiz. Now, I've done a lot of online quizzes like that, personality quizzes, and the ENJF scale, and Jungian archetypes and all of that stuff. But I got to tell you, I started doing that quiz, and by question 6, it was clear to me that Flora Ware is very learned and experienced and knows what she's doing and what she's talking about. And B, that she put an incredible amount of thought and work into designing this archetypal quiz. So if you have the time, I would encourage you to take 10, 15 minutes to go to Flora Ware's website and take that divine feminine archetype quiz, just to see what you are. I got the priestess archetype. Her archetypal system is a little different than what you described, but like I said, it's along the similar lines. And the training that she herself offers through her website, like I said, sounds very similar to what you described. And fun fact, I don't know if you know this or not, but the reason that there are 13 episodes in a season for the Girlfriend God is because there are 13 cycles of the moon in a year.
Love it. Perfect. Yes. Well, and I would just say one quick thing about Sanctuary, the Open Heart too, is that Ariel is no longer teaching personally anymore. So there are what she calls focalizers who are authorized to teach the material that there's only a handful of them. It's not, they've gone through the cycle many times, and they do offer some programs. There are a lot in person. Most of them are in California, in the Bay Area or around Grass Valley, Nevada City. But there are a couple people who are doing the online programs as well. So, yeah. But I will definitely check out Flora's work.
I was going to say, maybe I don't know Flora that well. Maybe that's in her kind of lineage somewhere. You know what I mean?
It might. Yeah, it's entirely possible. And there are people out there who have gone through the 13 Moon Mystery School. But I also, and this kind of may lead into, Kelly, what we were going to talk about. At this point in my life, am really feeling into the multiplicities of the sacred feminine. Like she is all the things. She is everything.
Yes.
So it makes sense to me that there would be lots of wisdom keepers who are receiving this information, and I don't know, I don't love the word download, but like are pulling this information in to this reality, and then they are the conduit and transmitting it out through their vessel. And so there's the similarities and there's the differences. And I say yes to all of them. It's just about finding what's resonant for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the benefit of the listeners, and again, for me, because I never remember anything, read that description that was in the email that you put so beautifully when we were tossing around topics for this episode. Okay,
so I closed my email so it wouldn't ding at us. So I don't have it in front of me anymore. But I think, I'm going to try to recreate. I think what I said is that, and this was, big focus of my book and of what I do with the podcast too, is understanding and celebrating the multiplicities of the sacred feminine, and especially understanding that if we talk about her as one thing, one historical thing from one part of the world, we're kind of cutting her off at the knees. There's actually a tremendous amount of diversity around the sacred feminine. And so I am really passionate about having that conversation with people.
Okay. So I don't know if you've listened to an episode of mine where I've talked about this, but in my podcast, I talk about what I refer to as my diamond head God theory, right? So, because part of my path has been realizing that, because I try to be, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, right? Like I tried to walk a pagan path and to be a polytheist, and through that path discovered that at the end of the day, really, I'm a monotheist, right? Like I'm an essential monotheist. However, because I have had the experience of working with multiple goddesses, so I came up with this diamond head God theory, which is that, yes, I believe that there are all these, I believe in the energy of all these different goddesses that I've worked with. However, I believe that they are all facets of the one goddess, right? They are all her, and just, whoever you want to name, Kabale and Hecate and Diana and Artemis and Ellen of the Way, all of that. They are all just various aspects of her. And I believe how she has revealed herself to us in the world. And I think you're right. We do cut her off at the knees and ourselves by limiting the knowledge that we get by having this very limited view of what that tradition looks like in the world. So go ahead, and I'm just going to probably interrupt you with questions. So how, I know that you did a lot of research for your book.
Yeah.
So I imagine that in the beginning, that seemed like a somewhat daunting task. So like, where did you start? Were you just like, because I imagine if I were writing your book, I would have bet that would have been the overwhelming feeling was, where do I start?
Yeah. Well, and the short backstory on that is I came out of the business world. So this was not where I intended to be. I had my own consulting company and I was all into that. I mean, I was into it, I was, and this was how I was going to embrace, in a weird way, I don't want to say femininity, but like my rah-rah womanhood, because if I could go and be successful in these spaces, then I am being like the kind of 21st century woman that I want to be. And then, the divine feminine kind of showed up in my life in this very dramatic sort of way. And I didn't know how to hold these two things. So I ended up leaving the company that I founded. And so I could do this kind of research. And what happened almost from the get-go was I wanted to be very methodical about it. Like I love to organize things. I'm a Virgo all the way.
I'm a Virgo rising, so I get that. I feel you.
I'm like, if you want to make me happy, like go organize. Well, actually you can't organize my closet. I have to do it, but sit with me or just watch me do it and tell me how great it is. That would
give me something to let me organize your closet.
Yes. I don't understand why my children don't appreciate this gift that I have, but it's really wrong. But so I would ordinarily like, all right, well, I'm going to build a spreadsheet or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to go this. And there was just a hard no about doing research in that way. So it ended up being very organic and very breadcrumb like, where things would fall into my path. And I remember even initially when I started, I mean, we do what you do, right? You're like, oh, what is the divine feminine? I'm going to go to Amazon and I'm going to go to Google. Like, I'm going to just go research stuff. And initially I was finding things that at the time, for who I was at the time, I was like, this stuff is, whoa, this is kind of weird. I don't know. I just came out of the business world. I'm Mrs. Businessy businesswoman. I'm not going to be wearing my flowered muumuu and howling at the moon, which is 100% what I do now. But I wanted like the I wanted what felt to me like substantive, not that that is not substantive, but that was my lens at the time. And
Yes.
so that skewed me more towards academic works, to the point that I even thought about maybe I should go and try to get a graduate degree in this work. And that was also a hard no, because one of the
Right.
things that came up for me as I began doing this work was this understanding that everything we have has been built on a foundation of patriarchy and patriarchal religions. And
Uh,
everything has been built with that lens, including academia. And I'm not dissing
yes.
academia, but the reality is that model was built without the input of women. It just was. And so it seemed really important that for me in my path that I didn't go that way. So it really was kind of an organic, like this book. I think the very first book I read was called The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler.
Yes.
Yeah, classic. And then, and then the next one would fall in my path, and then the next one. And it just evolved like that over years.
So one of the things I would really like to do next season, and I will certainly invite you to come along. I want to do some of these like panel episodes with like three or
Yeah.
four people. And one of the panel episodes I want to do is because I'm at that kind of like you, like I'm at that middle place, right? Like I'm not an academic. I was an
Yeah.
academic while I was in graduate school, and then after graduate school, like I didn't have an academic job after graduate school, but I was still like in that field, and I worked with other academics and I worked with other librarians and whatever. So I have that mindset, and because I went to graduate school and I have my degree in library and information science, I'm a really good researcher, like I have that skill set.
Yeah.
But that isn't what I'm doing now. So, and it wasn't what I did before. So how do we bridge the gap between, the average woman who feels that call, because it does feel like a calling, right? That's what women that I talk to
Yeah.
describe it as, that or a pull or whatever. How do we bridge the gap between those women who go to Amazon and Google
Yeah.
with real academic knowledge and source material, and you know what I mean? How do we
Yeah.
bridge the gap between the misinformation of your average, Facebook fucking witch group and
Yeah.
and real knowledge?
Yeah.
Especially since one of the things with academia is, especially since real knowledge is often behind a paywall.
Right. I know this is such a huge question. I think about this all the time. I mean, in a way, this is why I wrote my book, which of course you do have to pay for it, but there's a lot of labor involved. So I think that's fair.
Right, right.
But
Well, and
and
yours
also,
is affordable.
yes.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
But
It's
like most journal article, like JSTOR for the average person who's not an academic, not affordable.
Yeah. I would like to challenge the idea that information about the divine feminine needs to be academic in nature. Like we have historical information, for
Yes,
example, about all kinds of stuff. You could go online right now and learn about World War II, and you're going to get accurate information. It's
right,
buried because we have not prioritized this history. So for me,
right,
I am really interested in how do we pull her story into our everyday reality, and then also get it in front of people so that they know that this is still relevant. Like if you are a woman whose life is very full, you got a full-time job, maybe you got a couple kids, I don't know, you're like running here and there like everybody. um, this can be incredibly, valuable to you, but do you know it? And how do you know? Like, how can we
right,
show
right.
you that these multi-thousand year histories of inequity and burying our stories are still playing out in your life right now, because
Right.
they are 100% they are. So
Right.
that is a very real question that I kind of wrestle with too. And another reason why I wrote the book and tried to pull the history into very plain language with lots of recommendations. Or if you want to go learn from someone else, you really want to go into that academic book, go here, go like, let's
Right.
lift
Right.
each other up. And it's one of the reasons why I do my podcast too, is to bring these conversations in a really grounded and practical way, hopefully meeting people where they are. And
Right.
it's tricky. It's really tricky.
Well, me too. I mean, you've seen
Yeah.
that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's my whole thing with the
Yeah.
podcast. That's its tagline, right? Bringing
Yeah.
you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience.
Totally. And that's why I knew this would be a good fit for us to talk. Yeah. It's right
Right.
up my alley.
Right. Because that's where I'm, that's where I'm trying to bring people together, is in that space
Yeah.
in between, because I know what it's like to be on both sides of that. And I kind of currently straddle that. Gratefully, I have enough academics in my life that can get me behind that paywall, right? Like,
Yeah.
I make lists of journal articles and I send it to Carla. And she sends me, and she goes behind the JSTOR paywall and gets me the journal articles, which you're really not supposed to do. But hopefully no one at her university is listening to this. But,
No, it's totally fine.
but I think that'll be a great episode. And I'll tell you, she's going to get real excited when she hears you talking about just the whole structure of that, because in one of the episodes she talks about, it might have been the episode with Dr. Angela Puka. She talks about how when she did her PhD and wanted to, follow this path of research with Artemis, she had a really hard time. She had a
Yeah.
really hard time getting her topics and theses and dissertations and all that approved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they were like, I don't know. I don't know if that's really a thing, you know?
Oh, such a bias. And I think it's
Yes.
maddening how subtle and yet how pervasive it is.
Well, because power hides in plain sight.
I remember telling a male friend once, many years ago, that, because I had my own awakening to this understanding of the fact that everything we have is really built on these patriarchal foundations. Whether or not you are Christian, doesn't really matter. Like, that is a core, those values are a core foundation of our country. We really
Right.
value Greek civilization. That's also very patriarchal, sends very
Right.
specific messages. And we built everything in our culture on top of these things. And so I remember telling this male friend, I was like, there's not one underpinning institution, that cultural institution, that was created with the participation of women, period. And he's like, no, that's not right. And I'm like, okay, name one, name one. And then he just sat there like he was dumbfounded, because of course he never had a reason to think about it. Most
Right.
of us haven't, but you start to name them: academia, entertainment, government, financial systems, economic models, religion. Like, I mean, the list goes on. And of course, if you want to expand your lens and be intersectional, which we should, we can say that that's all only been open to a handful of, white European men at that, like it's
Right.
cut a lot of people out. But certainly women, 50% of the population, and that matters. So when you open the doors to these places and say, oh, now you can come in, everything's fine. Well, no, like, this was never
Right.
made with our
Right.
perspective, our needs, even our perceptions. I was just having a conversation with a woman yesterday who had been in seminary and is no longer taking that path, but had been doing some translations of a Bible story, The Woman at the Well. And it was
Mhm.
mostly men in her class, and there were two women, and they're translating the original. Oh gosh, is it Hebrew? I think it is. It's Hebrew. And
Or Aramaic or
whatever she was translating from, I think it was Hebrew, and that the men were getting very different conclusions from the translations. And that
of course they were. Of course
right,
they were.
in that language, there's a lot of flexibility for interpretation. And so the men are telling these women, you're wrong. Nope, that's wrong. And they're like, I'm not wrong. Like, I'm seeing it in a different way. And all that has filtered into our education system and everything else. So
Yes,
that stuff matters. It
it
totally
is so
matters.
insidious. And, since I've been doing this show and I've talked to so many people um, in Europe, I can see that some of these issues are intensified here in the
Mm,
United States because we
interesting.
are such a young country,
Yeah.
right? And especially where I am in the Midwest, or really any place that, and I'm sure you see this in rural Virginia too, any place that is, how do I want to say this? I don't know, any place that's conservative, right? Because even though, okay, so anywhere in the country, right? Any state, any city where there's a university, like here, like a large university, if there's a university, that city is a pocket of of liberalism, right?
Yeah.
If you drive 15 to 20 miles outside of town in any direction, you'll see Trump signs and fucking mega churches with 50-foot crosses everywhere.
Yeah.
So here, I feel like I'm constantly reminding people that there is a history that exists before 1776.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
I do.
like, I'm always envious of people who get to go see ancient ruins.
You
We don't
know.
have ancient ruins here. We kind of do. Like, we have
Well,
ancient burial sites and indigenous things, but you know what I mean.
well, and we do, and actually, but that's one of the things that I've tried to do in my work too, is to broaden that story. Like, we are on ancient lands here, and what we did is
Yes,
we just wiped out those stories. And like, for example, even in the Midwest, right, in Ohio, you've got the serpent mounds built by, I don't
yes,
remember the indigenous people, but they built
yes.
those. And there are plenty of people that think there is a sacred feminine. I would defer to the indigenous to define their own experiences, and I don't know their oral histories, but that that is there. It is there. But you're right. We take a very limited view of
Right.
um, stories and history here in the United States.
You know, I mean, I'm just like, the wheels are spinning now. I remember reading about, and this was several years ago. Somebody spearheaded a project with Wikipedia because they did a statistical study with Wikipedia. Because, anybody can go in and edit Wikipedia, right?
Right.
And they did a study, and it was some alarming number, like, I don't know, 89% of the editing done on Wikipedia is by white European men.
Yeah.
And and it was some sort of like decolonizing Wikipedia project, right? That somebody
Yeah.
spearheaded. Like I said, I don't remember the details because it was several years ago. But I wonder if we could, when I say we, I don't mean just you and me. I mean like a group of people, could spearhead something like that and have, like, because they did like editorial drives, right? Like, people would sign up to take an hour or 3 hours a week to go in and update edits for Wikipedia entries related to a particular topic or a particular event in history to more accurately reflect the Black perspective.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we could do something like that, with the divine feminine history or goddess history.
I think that would be really cool. I love that. I often feel that there's like an added layer of complexity when we begin talking about the divine feminine. Like, for example, if we are talking from a more secular place, feels
Mhm.
like there's pretty general agreement in liberal circles, for example, that women's history has been woefully underreported. And so let's get those stories out.
Mhm.
Let's have well, we're in the, we're recording this in Women's History Month right now, right? So there's
Right, right.
awareness that history's been written by men. So we need to get those stories in there. But I also think there's the added complexity that seems to me, and Kelly, I don't know if you feel the same, but that we kind of have an allergy to the sacred, like if you were really, if you were educated and, you believe in science, then therefore you shouldn't believe in anything mystical, numinous, unseen, and unknown. And so and the divine feminine gets hit twice, right? Because she's like female.
Right.
And then we're talking about the sacred, which is something that a lot of people are just uncomfortable. It's either Jesus or you just don't talk about it. Like it's just something that's not supposed to be part of your world. And so I find that challenging.
Don't you think that's changing though?
I hope so. And again, I think you're right. It's in pockets. I think it depends. I can say where I only moved here to Virginia 2 years ago. I was in California before that for 14 years in the Bay Area. I grew up in Georgia, so that was a whole different experience. But But in California, I would find my pockets of my people, that's where I did my priestess training, all that. It was very open to that. There's a yoga community. So I think that kind of opens yourself up to Eastern philosophy.
Right.
But if you started talking about the divine feminine, specifically among circles of well-educated, liberal white folks, it could start to get very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We're comfortable talking about science. We're comfortable talking about data. We're comfortable talking about social and environmental justice, but not conversations around the sacred.
Right. Well,
in that context.
I hope that that's changing, and
I do too. I mean, I like to think you and I are helping that. That's why we're doing this, right?
Yeah, I do too. I would love one of the people that I want to find to reach out to hopefully come on the show is somebody in the scientific field who's been involved with I don't know if you've read about these studies that they've done where they do brain scans of people in a meditative state or when they pray, and the same parts of the brain light up, the same parts of the pleasure center light up as they do when we drink or use narcotics or whatever. So there is a link, right? I mean, there is science that proves that science and spirituality are not mutually exclusive.
Yes, although it depends on whose hands it's in. Like I can share with you an article that was just shared in my Facebook group in the last week. And the headline was, it was something about God. Like, are we having a relationship with God, or do we all just want our mommies? Which was hysterical, right? Because first of all, like, why are these two things separate? I think it's a yes.
Right.
It's both. But it was a brain scientist who was looking at exactly what you're talking about, but it seemed like his conclusion was, and therefore there is no God. It's just this like electrical impulses that are happening in our brains, right? If you put it in the hands of one person, they're going to be like, oh, this is more proof that there is no God. This is just random stuff that's firing in the brain. You put it in the hands of someone else with a different, more expanded view. They'll be like, yes, see, confirmed. Like it's a yes and a yes.
Right.
Yeah. So,
right. Like I saw not that long ago, my wife and I watched Bill Maher, and who I actually am usually in agreement with on most things, not everything, most things. Anyway, he had David Duchovny on, and David Duchovny, who I think is an incredibly smart person and very well read and very educated. And he was talking about how there was this recent scientific discovery where they think that people who think they talk to God, it's really just one side of their brain talking to the other side of their brain.
Yeah.
So, and David Duchovny is a self-professed atheist. So
as is Bill Maher, right? Isn't Bill Maher an atheist as well?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Which to me, I think the idea that we need to have an answer to that is just, it's a little like, how could we have an answer? And why can't both those things this is really where I hope we're going as a culture is,
Right.
and I already said this word, multiplicities, because one of the greatest lessons I've gotten from the divine feminine in my work with her is that every time the answer is yes, which is a real mind bender, right?
Yes.
Like, is this true? Yes. Is this also true? Yes. Are these things in contradiction with each other in accordance with my limited brain? Yes. And
Right.
so, how do we stand on this ground that is constantly shifting and moving and shaking? And it's not about getting firmer in beliefs. I think it's just about expanding the possibility of what is sacred and what's the divine. And to me, I think
Right.
that's the gift that she's given me.
So I was thinking, I was talking about in the United States, I always want to tell people there's a history that exists before 1776. I'm also fond of telling people, here's what I say when we talk about the patriarchy and religion. I say the patriarchy can really only claim the last 6,000 years. The matriarchy can claim about the last 30,000 years.
Yeah.
I mean, based on what I know, um, and you were saying, okay, so in terms of what we need to look beyond, I'm often frustrated by when I'm doing research, like basic research online, not academic research, just like what's available online. Um, I feel like I need to tell Google and other such search results that there is mythology other than Greek and Roman mythology,
Yeah.
right? Like I actually have to type in Slavic mythology, Russian mythology, Polish mythology, you know what I mean? African mythology. Like there
Right.
are other places in the world.
Right.
Did you run into that when you were doing research for your book?
I did. And at first, I don't think I realized how sort of skewed it was because there is a history when we talk about the divine feminine of talking about her. I think there's a lot of emphasis on Europe and the Middle East in particular, and you're right, even specific parts of Europe. So
Right.
you might find Celtic mythology easier, or
Celtic
yeah,
mythology is big, especially with the resurgence of witchcraft and interest in witchcraft.
yeah, Greek mythology totally easy to find, Roman mythology easy to find, and then that filtered through into the British Isles, right, and other parts of Europe. So, and then North African mythology, right? You can find Egyptian mythology. That's not too hard to find.
Yes.
But beyond that, it gets trickier, and then it gets even trickier still if you say, and this became increasingly important to me as I went on with my research of like asking the question, who's doing this research? Because even if, like, let's, for example, when I first started learning about um, shamanism and indigenous wisdom,
Mhm.
I went to Amazon, I went to Google. This was sort of my precursor to finding the divine feminine. And I found some books that were really informative to me and they were really helpful to me. I didn't realize until later, or didn't have the lens to think about it, that they were written by men of European descent or American anthropologists. That brings a very different lens than, let's say, a native person who is part of a particular tradition, maybe even if
Yes.
they pass down their stories orally. And so I can counter the same thing with the divine feminine. Like, for example, if I was looking for books about goddesses that come out of the Hindu and yoga traditions, I could
Mhm.
find a lot of stuff written by white women. Got a lot harder
Yeah.
to find it by Indian women, women of Indian descent. And I'd
Yes.
find that even if I would type that into the search results, I wouldn't get that. And so there's a bias there as well. And it became
Yes.
really important in my research that if I was going to quote somebody, that I did as best as I could, again, not an academic, but as best as I could, to find people who were native to that tradition
Yes.
or demonstrated really deep understanding of that tradition and that it's not theirs. Like they needed to be able to take an intersectional
Right.
lens, because I didn't want to put their work out and further promote it if not.
Right.
And it
Right.
was challenging, and it's still challenging now. I mean, like, for example, I've spoken to a friend who's of Chinese descent. We've talked about the Tao Te Ching and how it has a very feminine feel to it. And there's actually a woman here in the United States that has offered up a divine feminine a divine feminine Tao Te Ching. It's beautiful. So she's reinterpreted those poems. She is an American woman. Now, she spent years living in China and other parts of Asia. She's fluent in the language. Like, she's, I would say, qualified to do this. But what
Mhm.
I'm curious about is, where are the women of Asian descent who might be
Right.
doing that work? And are they just out there and I'm not finding them because the search results aren't coming to me? You know,
Right.
my Chinese friend said it could be a translation issue. It's present in China. It's not making its way here. China is also a very patriarchal culture right now. The totally, you know, so that research is probably not necessarily being encouraged.
Right.
Um, but there's a lot of factors that come in, and I think we need to start getting curious, you know, like who's
Yes.
writing the story? Where did they get their information from? And what assumptions might be being made that they don't even know that they're making? And
Right.
and this is where, for me, talking about the divine feminine, we have to, as a white woman, I have to acknowledge that that's part of it too, because I've got a particular lensing,
Right.
and I'm part of this patriarchal stew. I'm part of this
Right.
white
We have to look at
supremacist
our
stew.
own, we have to look at our own inherent biases.
Yeah, and even know that they're there, even if we don't know that we're passing them on potentially.
Right. I mean, I discovered that when I started, like really looking around for podcast guests, right? Because after like
Yeah.
the first 3 episodes, I was like, oh, like I got to keep doing this. I got to keep finding people that
Yeah.
are willing to come on this show. And I did feel like, I mean, I have kind of a niche topic, so it's
Yep.
not like, you know what I mean? So, um, yeah. And I was, by the end of season 1, I was like, what is it with the gatekeepers of spiritual wisdom? What is it with all these fucking white women?
Yeah.
What is it with all these fucking white women? And then I went to the thing that Flora Ware put together, which was very diverse. And
Hmm.
2 or 3 of this, well, 3, including Flora Ware, of the speakers that I have, of the guests that I have for season 2, came from that workshop.
Nice.
Um, I was also going to say, when you're talking about indigenous shamanism, Angela Puka, that episode 15, yeah, episode 15, uh, that's kind of her specialty, is Italian shamanism.
Nice.
And in that episode, she talked about how the word shamanism is really an academic
Yeah.
construct.
Totally. Yep.
Um, and that, according to most academics and anthropologists, that practice originated in Siberia.
Right.
So this leads me into a question of, I feel like, okay, this is where I'm going to channel my inner Bill Maher. Okay.
Okay. Oh boy.
Well, because so I am becoming more and more of a crotchety old woman, right? Like I feel that I'm starting to feel my age. I turned 50 this past year. I'm going to be 51 this year. I've always been a little ahead of my time in terms of crotchety before I should have been. Uh, so now I'm becoming a little more crotchety, especially being exposed to this landscape and doing this kind of work and seeing the kind of ignorance that's out there.
Yeah.
Um, Although, because I am a spiritual person, I do try and be kinder than I used to be about my crotchetiness. Anyway, uh, I feel like we've taken the whole cultural appropriation argument a little too far at times.
Mm.
So I can see what people mean when they say, isn't it all fucking cultural appropriation? You know what I mean? Like everything
Yeah.
we've got came
Yep.
from somewhere. So I agree 100% with what you're saying, right? Like I want to talk to the people that actually practice these things. I'm working on a book about Ellen and
How
talk about
wonderful.
her too. It isn't really about Ellen, though. It's about this common trope that crosses a lot of cultures and time periods and geography and whatever. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is find there are no Sami tribes in the United States, but there are descendants of Sami who still kind of practiced their culture,
Yeah.
live in Alaska. So I would like to contact somebody there so that I can talk to somebody who's really familiar with Sami culture
Yep.
and who's a direct descendant of a Sami line. Um, but if I read a book that I knew was written by someone who was, say, a Sami reindeer herder, and they wrote instructions of how to do a ritual, I wouldn't feel like I was culturally appropriating if I did that ritual because I'm not Sami. Does
Hmm.
that make sense?
It does. 100%.
So where do you fall on that? I mean, do you think that people take that too far? Do you think people take that too far? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think it's an individual choice. Like you could say, like for example, in my 13 Moons mystery school, you're drawing on divine feminine archetypes, and those archetypes have goddesses underneath that umbrella, and they are from around the world. So,
Right,
like if we talked about the creator, destroyer, preserver archetype, Kali fits underneath that. I'm not Hindu.
right,
I don't have a history of working with her. So I think first of all, it's an individual choice as to how you do that. To me, the cultural appropriation comes in when you go out then and sell yourself as an expert on that tradition, might try to make money off of that ritual,
right,
offering it to people when it's not yours, and especially when you add the tangled history of colonialism. So if my people were involved
right,
in decimating that person's culture, and
right,
now I'm out selling their spiritual wisdom that has been decimated because of my ancestors, and I'm not doing any cleanup work around that, like whatever that cleanup work looks like for you, whether it's energetic or actual reparations,
right,
then I'm out of integrity. That's for me, that would be my response. However, and I do write about this in my book, I one of the first goddesses that appeared to me in a non-academic way was Kali. I didn't know who she was, but I had a blue-skinned woman with a circle of objects hanging around her neck that showed up in my meditation. What do I do with that?
right.
And as soon as I Googled blue skin lady circles around her neck, I get this picture and I'm like, oh my God, that's her. And whoa, those are skulls. And holy shit, why did this show
Right,
up?
right, right.
And and then, you learn like, well, all the things that she's associated with, which, it gets, it can get kind of messy the way, again, that it's interpreted in
Right,
popular culture. But my philosophy on that is that the divine feminine will reach us however she can. And if you have my heritage and my background, which is Southern Baptist, you've got absolutely zero to work with in,
right,
in
right,
terms of the divine feminine and no
right,
exposure to that. So if Mother Mary had showed up, I'd be like, no, get out of here. I now have a beautiful relationship with her. I understand much more about her, but
right.
it would not have spoken to me in the way that that did. And I can't, had I seen a picture of her before some point in my life, maybe, I don't know, Bill Maher would say that's just your brain pulling something up and
Right,
giving
right.
it to you. But it seemed to come forward for a reason. And then like 2 days later, I picked up a book that had nothing to do with Kali, and she ended up in the book halfway through it. And I was like, whoa, this is weird. So
Right.
it all felt very organized. I guess the other thing that I would say about the cultural appropriation piece is there's a book called Jailbreaking the Goddess
Ooh,
by someone named Lasara Firefox Allen.
okay.
They are non-binary now, so I'm not sure that they work with the goddess anymore, but there's a lot in there that was very helpful to me about understanding how to work with the goddess in a non-appropriative way. And one of the things that they say is, if a particular goddess calls to you, or you are called by her, sit with her for like a day or a week or a year or a lifetime. And
Yeah.
don't just like throw her on your altar and be like, well, now I know what it means to be in relationship. And
Yes.
also understand that she comes in a context. So Ellen, I don't know if Ellen, I mean, you may know more than I do at this point, but I know there's a Siberian deer goddess that may be
Yes.
connected to who the
Yeah.
Sami honor. So understand her in the context of that tradition and honor that. And that can get really uncomfortable for you because the way we might interpret that goddess and what she has to say to us might be totally different than what she means to those people. And it's not that you reject either of those things, it's that you sit in the discomfort and the expansion of that. Like, what am I supposed to learn from this?
Yeah.
That is where I try to go with that.
Right. And I
Yeah.
saw a lot of that in the, in the witch, that's what irritated me in the witchcraft community, because I saw a lot of that.
Mm,
Oh, this seems like a really cool goddess. I'm gonna buy this statue and throw it on my altar and call it a day.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
especially if you're doing spell work.
Yeah.
Like I want
Yeah.
to know what I'm doing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I want to know that it's right,
Right.
because I take that kind of work very seriously. You know what I mean? Like I don't want,
Yes. Well, and I think
you
it
know,
gets even
I'm
more
working with things that are a power somewhat beyond my control. You know what I mean? And if
right.
I get it wrong, I don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
You know?
And I think it gets even trickier slash more important when you're talking about goddesses who exist now for people. So, for example, I have learned, because this is not my path, but I have learned from podcast guests who practice religions that traditionally come out of Africa that um, um, Vodou, why am I totally drawing a Yoruba,
Yeah, yeah,
Aregla, Lekumi, like a lot of these that there are specific orishas that some people may know. Like, for example, you may know Oshun. A lot of people know the name Oshun, this gorgeous Black River goddess.
mhm.
Unfortunately, she sometimes is depicted as white, which is really disturbing.
Yeah,
But
it's a lot of whitewashing of goddesses. Yeah.
yeah, but in the Yoruba tradition, what I have been told by the practitioners of that who have talked to me is that there's a very specific path that you have to work with a goddess. You have a godfather or a godmother in that tradition. You join a particular lineage, a particular house, and they work with you to decide which god or goddess is calling you. And there is a hierarchy there. And that's really uncomfortable for some of us when we're trying to unpack patriarchy and like all the ways it's boxed us in.
Right.
But that is a living tradition. It is a living tradition from a culture that we have a history of trying to destroy. And so, from my perspective, it is way more important that I step back. So, in that case, I probably wouldn't work with Oshun. Now, if she showed up to me very loudly, then I
Right.
try to get deeper into it and learn with it. But I might not choose to work with her because it's a living tradition with a very specific framework around
Right.
how you connect with her.
Right.
And I'd want to honor that. That seems like the right thing to do as opposed to just pulling it out of the context.
Right.
And I say all that with a caveat because, like I said, Kali came roaring into my life and I didn't know what to do with that, you know? So,
So let's talk about Ellen.
yeah,
So I really want to talk to Caroline.
yeah,
I
yeah,
really want to talk to her. Just to talk to her. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Because her book was so influential.
yeah,
Because for me, her book was really the only what I would consider source material out there about Ellen. I mean, you have the Ellen Sentier books, but that's
Yes.
really more about her personal gnosis than what I would consider source material.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
I think so. And also, I think having talked to Caroline, I think she'd be the first. I mean, she says it in her book too. It's just a name. It's a name that she's put on,
Right.
and she's following tracks through European history to try and find what she's calling this dear goddess, and she's trying to find
Right.
connections to. There is a very academic book that I got. I don't know if you found this one yet. It's the Dear Goddess of Ancient Siberia. Have you found
I
that one?
just had
Yeah.
it because they have it in the stacks at the university here. So I was able.
Yeah. You're lucky. I had to order it through like the interlibrary loan, and it took forever, and I only had 3 weeks with it, and I had to send it back, and I didn't have time to read the whole thing. I was really disappointed. But and
I
if you
didn't
try
get
to
to
buy it,
read the whole. I didn't get to read the whole thing, but I had to return it. But I can get it again.
yeah, and if you try to buy it used, it's hundreds of dollars. It's crazy.
Yeah, it was like
But
$400 last time I checked.
yeah, but I think that even in her work, Caroline is very clear. Like, we're following the tracks of this
Right.
thing that we intuited. So there's a gnosis piece, and now we're
Right.
looking for the historical piece.
Right.
Um,
And that's why I want to write the book.
yeah.
Um, because finding Ellen or the search for Ellen of the Ways, what that book came out in like 2015, right? So I
Hmm.
feel like the follow-up is kind of overdue. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And in the research that I've done, taking what was in there, I can't, because I mean that book, my copy of that book is like, it's earmarked and it's got post-it notes in it and it's highlighted and it's got tape flags on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, I did follow a lot of the citation chains and in the chapters that have endnotes in the back, and um, the most compelling leads that I found all kind of led to the same place, which is what you're talking about, which is that there are these tropes and symbols and ideas about antlers and deer and antlered goddesses and antlered women and horned goddesses. And those tropes cross many cultures across millennia, across many different parts of the world,
Hmm.
starting in Siberia.
Yeah.
So that's the book I'm going to write.
Mm.
And like I said, I would love to talk to Caroline about that. And I don't know about you, but before I heard her talk about that book, I didn't know that book existed.
No, well, and I'll tell you, this is a great example of, intuition meeting like research. Which is the space I like to play in. But I did a journey with a friend. We just did a lay down on the ground and did a drumming journey together, just the
Yeah.
two of us, a couple years ago. And in that journey, I saw this woman who was wearing horns,
Yeah.
and it was just there were many things that happened in it. I went up in the journey, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting to go down. It's unusual for me. And when I went up, there was a walking of a grid, like lines. There were like lines laid out over the earth, and I was walking them. And then I see this woman with horns, and she opens a door to me, which is like to the entire cosmos. And so after this journey, I write all this stuff down, and then I start Googling. And that was where my mind got blown, because Ellen is, the horned goddess. She is connected. Caroline writes about her having a connection to astral travel. There's a whole connection of the energy lines of the earth, ley lines, which Caroline, as she talks about them, we're probably talking about ancient animal tracks, where the animals were
Right.
following water, and humans needed to follow the animals because that's where their food came from. So all
Right.
of that just sort of, it was sometimes you can have these sort of kind of mystical experiences and you're like, well, I could interpret that this way or that way. This one
Right.
was so spot on for me that I was like, okay, I think I need to know who Ellen is.
Right.
And so that's how I had not heard of Caroline's work before. And it
Mm.
really blew my mind. And I think in that work, she's I feel like they're all pretty humble. They're very clear that they're not positing like definitive answers. They're
Right.
asking interesting questions and then
Right.
saying, this is what I found. And isn't this,
Right.
I'm following this lead and I'm following that lead. And isn't this interesting?
Right.
Um, and when I had my conversation with Caroline, I loved her answer because one of my questions was, why? Why is Ellen showing up now? And her
Yeah.
answer was one that was deeply rooted in a practical answer, which is the reindeer herds are in trouble. Like our
Yeah.
antlered and hoofed friends are being threatened right now. Like we
Well,
can
they're
put them
already,
in.
I mean, caribou are already extinct in the United States.
Right. Right. So if they're showing up, it's because they're asking us for our help. Like, yes. And yes, there may be reasons why Ellen as a goddess is calling to her and what her energies hold as well. But there's also this practical reason, which is, when I think of that, I don't know where you land, Kelly, but when I think of the research of these women showing up with their horns, and I, I think of, it makes me think of goddess as much as animism, which is our relationship with our animal kin, who
Right.
we have a symbiotic relationship with. We put on the horns to call in their energy, to connect more deeply with them, to interact with them. So it's a goddess energy, but it's also very practical relational energy with our animal kin.
Right. So there definitely seems to be a theme like happening in culture,
Yeah.
right? This whole horned goddess thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's interesting. And I just like I see it and I'm like, huh. You know what I mean? That's often my my reaction. It's just like, huh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Um, yeah, it blows my mind. I mean, I don't even remember how I discovered Ellen. Like she just kind of fucking popped up one day. Like I'm sure it was in like a Facebook group or something. And then it was one of those things, right? Where like I saw like one thing and then I saw a bunch of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which I know that part of that, is just the internet knows everything about me, right? And knows what I'm interested in and knows what I'm thinking. So things are showing up,
Yes.
right? Like I know the realism part, right? Like Amazon suggests something to me because I was just talking about it yesterday.
Yes.
Mm. But still, right? Or maybe that's just my way of rationalize something that is in fact a mystical experience because that's what we're trained to do.
I know, right? I always want to go yes and again. Like, yes, you're right. They stalk us. They know everything.
Right.
And
Right.
is source spirit goddess using that as a really convenient way, like going, wow, this is so much easier to get in front of you than it used to be. Like I used to have to throw a giant vision in front of you, and now I can just send you an Amazon link,
Right. Right. Um, yeah. And then I want to say a couple things about Ellen. So that was all when I was in Pittsburgh. And when I was in Pittsburgh, I was in Pittsburgh for 4 years. And when I was in Pittsburgh, where we lived in a complex, and they were all single-story townhouses. And our unit was only attached to one other unit. So there was the front-facing one, the one that faced the street, and then there was our unit, which was the rear unit. So our unit faced this patch of natural woodland, and
Mm,
deer were abundant.
yeah.
Uh, and the complex had been there a long time. So the deer were very bold. I mean, they would practically come up and ring your doorbell.
Yeah.
Um, so they were very used to people. We would feed them carrots, we'd leave carrots and potatoes and stuff out for them, and other people in the complex did the same thing. And we would see the babies in the spring. I mean, it was when we moved back, just I don't know, maybe 3 months ago, I felt this, I don't know, I was experiencing some sort of grief and I didn't know where it was coming from. And I realized how much I missed those deer because we saw them every day.
Yeah.
Every day. They were right outside my door.
I see so much in the thou shalt have one God and only one God, and I am it. I'm it. It's me. And I feel like right now for a lot of people it's science or data or logic or whatever, you're going to put it up on the pedestal and there can be no conflict around that. Like it's just a
Right.
hard no. And anytime I see that in myself or in other people, I feel like it's a red flag. It's like
Right.
how are these ancient patterns still at play?
Right.
Even when we don't know it.
Right. Well, and I think that we have seen that in the popularity of, this resurgence of the popularity of witchcraft and this resurgence of neo-paganism, because the other thing that she specifically mentions in her book is, the backlash that she got from pagans, right?
Right.
Saying there is no antlered goddess, there is only an antlered god. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So even within the context of pagan, which normally Ellen of the Ways would fall under,
Right.
they rejected that premise. So yeah, like again, power hides in plain sight, and that patriarchy, it's so ingrained, and we miss it. We
Yeah, and
unless
yeah,
people like you and me point it out to other people with kindness.
yeah. I think the question, and again, I feel like I've said this already, but how can we find the multiplicity in this? Like to me, that's one of the biggest places that we see this sort of rigid patriarchal thinking showing up right now is it's either
Right.
or, it's mine or you, it's black or white. Like there is no in between. And I think there's a lot of work to be done to just hold the space and then to get curious. Can these things coexist? How? Like, what might this be? Might my
Right.
interpretation be not wrong, but, limited in my viewpoint? Yeah, I had this guest come on my podcast recently. Her name is Joy Layden, and she's a transgender scholar of Judaism. And she wrote the most beautiful book of poems giving voice to the Holy Shekinah, which I can't do the
Mm,
Shekinah, I think this is it. Um,
yes,
which
I have
is
an episode about that too. I love that.
oh, she's so great. And so that's the divine feminine in Judaism. But one of the things that she said that has stayed with me ever since is that our understanding of God/goddess is like looking out a window. Like it's looking out a window. When you look out the window, you only see what you can see from the window, but that's not the whole world. Like there's
Right,
this whole
right,
360 view. And
right,
so, like, there's a humility I think that we can bring to like, this is what I'm
right,
seeing, and what I'm seeing is valid, but there's all this other stuff
right.
that I
And
can't see.
it's only one moment on the timeline.
That too, it's one moment,
I,
one view at this moment of who I am and experiencing it at this moment in time. And there's
right.
so much outside of that.
So
So,
much more. Well,
yeah.
here's what I know, Liz. This this goddess that I mean, I found the goddess through Ellen, right? Ellen has become I call her my patron deity, right?
Mm,
She is who I developed the most intense emotional relationship with.
yeah.
But through my relationship with her is how I have this relationship with like the goddess.
Hmm.
So what I know is that the goddess she is the greatest mother, sister, friend, lover, teacher, guide I have ever known. I've ever known.
It's beautiful. Totally agree.
So, okay. So, any closing thoughts before we get to the three questions?
Oh my goodness. Well, No, this has been so fun. I love being in conversation with you. It's just been really rich. So I'm super grateful for the
It
opportunity.
has,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
It's a shame we're white women. I
Well, you know what? I think
know. I know.
we got a lot of humble work to do, I think.
That's true.
And I'm here for it.
And we too have our history, right? I've been digging into my own
Oh yeah.
ancestry lately. Okay, so at the end of the show, I ask all of my guests the same three questions. If you've listened to the show, you already know what they are. So, give me a fun fact about yourself that people who know you would be surprised to learn.
Okay, so I forgot about these questions, so I didn't prepare. Um, a
That's
fun
good.
a fun fact about me that people would be surprised to learn. I already gave up my crazy organizational tendency. Okay, I have different colored plates and I insist that everybody color codes them when they put them in the cabinet, including my children, and I get upset when they don't.
Okay. Okay. All
It just
right.
looks better. There's a
Yeah.
pattern. It's so
Man, I
pretty.
get it. I get it. I get it. We're simpatico. I would totally put them in the right order. Question. The second
Okay.
question is your current favorite TV series or movie?
Current favorite TV series or movie. I'll just name the one that we're watching right now because we're rewatching it. My husband and I. We're watching Ted Lasso, and it really like enough that I wanted to go back and watch it again. And the reason I'll say why is it's feel good. God, there's so much heavy shit out there right now. It makes me feel good. And it's the rare examples of positive masculinity. And I think we need to see so much more of that. So, like grown men taking responsibility for their feelings, not sexualizing women, showing emotion. I want more of it for everybody.
Okay. Sadly, it's on Apple TV and I don't have that. So,
I know. I know.
okay. If your life were a movie, what would be the theme song on the soundtrack of your life?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to think of like um 20 different answers after we get done
You
with
can only give
this.
me one.
I know that's the
You'll
problem.
be on the
It's
show again, and then you can give me a different answer.
well, I'll tell you, that's funny you asked me this because the song I've woken up with this song in my head the last 2 days in a row. And it's a Harry Styles song of all
Okay,
people,
that's
which
all
is
right.
his popular song. And
Right.
the you know the chorus is it's not the same as it was. Which feels very, very much like my life with the divine feminine in it. So I'm going to go with that right now. And I'm going to think of
Okay.
so many better answers after this that I
Oh,
cannot give
no,
you.
that's a fabulous answer. That's a fabulous answer.
I
It
bet he
is.
had no idea it would be interpreted in that way when he wrote it, but
Right,
whatever.
right,
That's what happens to art.
right, right. All right, Liz. Well, this has been a lot of fun.
Thank you
It
so much.
has. And like I said, I'm sure I'll ask you to come on the show again.
I would
So,
love that.
yeah. And we'll do that panel episode where we get to talk about how we can keep pushing this needle a little bit farther forward and get the right information into the hands of the right women at the right time.
Yes. And I'll just say to any of your listeners, who are on this path with us, like, I don't know how you feel about this, Kelly, but I'm like, reach out, like send a note through social media or so, like, I just
Yes.
want us to know each other.
Yeah.
Like, this has been one of the sweetest things about having my podcast and also having my Facebook group is like, I'm like, oh, there are more of us out there. There are more of us out there than I thought. And it gives me hope. So yes.
Thank you again. I will reach out to you and send you a copy of the video when it's edited and give you a final date for the release. But
Awesome.
until then, I wish you all the blessings of the goddess, and I hope that you have a really, really great day.
Thank you. Okay, are you stopping recording or are you stopping the whole meeting?
I'm stopping the whole meeting.
Okay, so I'll send you an email because I've got an insight for you on the Sami people, not here in Alaska, but I'm going to send you a group where might be a connection for you.
Oh, okay. Fabulous. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Liz.
Yeah, take care.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks for watching or listening. If you want more of The Girlfriend God, you can find The Girlfriend God and The Girlfriend God podcast on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. The Girlfriend